Hi, everybody. See if I can get my computer to do what I like it to do. All right, we'll give everybody a moment to kind of get in and land. Connie, I think there's a couple people in the waiting room. I'm sure you see that, but all right. Oh my gosh. Week 2, y'all. It's week 2. All right, I think that's pretty much everybody who's already in the waiting room. So I am going to go ahead and jump right in again because we have an hour, right? Like, and I want to get as much to you in that hour as I can so that you guys can really maximize this time that we have together. So, as always, let's just kind of have the reminder that I love to see your faces if you feel comfortable. I know that's different than how a lot of people like to do it, but it helps me to kind of read the energy of the room, visual. And also, you don't have to. There's no pressure. I like to see all the hello to everybody. Just want to make sure I'm saying hi. And then also, I'm just going to reiterate because because sometimes the space needs it. So when we are in these spaces, they are here for us to really come together as a community, right? Like we are all trying to do amazing things in the world. And I don't know if I actually physically said this the last time. I generally set it up when I'm setting up a group space and the expectations and all those things. But the expectation in this space is that it's safe for all people, any kind of every color, every gender, everything, every belief system, right? Like I believe in diversity as the root of the human experience, and I want and invite different perspectives and different ways of being in the world. The only rule around it is that we do that in a respectful way, and that we respect that everyone has a different perspective. We respect everyone's background, where they come from, and that we stay in the mode. My one rule in all of my work with my clients and when I'm doing workshops is that we stay in curiosity mode without going into any kind of predetermined idea about what's right and what's wrong or what's good and what's bad. In these spaces, there is no such thing as right and wrong, right? So I just wanted to say that just in case we didn't hear it last time or it needs to be said. Just so that everybody feels safe, that it's a safe space, right? So that being said, I think we can hop right in. So I'm going to share my screen. I might even be prepared to do that in a way that would be easy, maybe. We'll see. So, yeah. And then I'm going to try and present. And sure, that sounds good. All right. We did it. Look at that. Technology working for us, for the win. All right, so let's jump in so that we have time to kind of get through all of the things. As you know, this is the NeuroCohesion Masterclass series that's here to help you introduce the idea of 5 elements into your work and how the 5 elements can bring, and some human design can bring depth to what you're doing sometimes, can help us to begin to identify where the patterns are in someone's life so that we can really create transformation. We can create kind of longevity in change and what I like to call alchemy in people's lives, right? So let's dive in. Today we're going to talk about the 5 elements as just kind of give you the basic understanding of the way that the 5 elements work, right? So again, if we look back to the history of 5 elements, we're talking about an ancient system, right? We're talking about one of the oldest energy modalities that we know of, not the oldest, but one of. And what those ancient Taoists and those ancient mystics and those ancient shamans really were noticing, this again, this comes from Chinese tradition, but what they were noticing was the relationship between how energy moves through nature and the cosmos and the correlation to the human. So this kind of idea of a holographic universe that we talk about in quantum physics now was being observed then, that they could find those patterns of the universe reflected in each individual. We now know at an energetic level that the whole universe is contained within every particle of the body, right? Within every cell of the body, kind of like the acorn and the oak tree. Within every acorn is the potential, the hologram of the whole tree. Everything it needs to become that tree is already there. And so we see that here then in these ancient observations of the movement of the stars all the way down to the seeds sprouting, right? And so, and they would correlate these understandings of nature with the expression of of our humanity, of being human. And in the ancient wisdom, what they really were finding was that you could see these when you looked at it through that lens, you could begin to see these predictable patterns that were tied to physical experiences or emotional experiences or mental experiences. And so it all fits together, right? And so nowadays, going back to last week's, just kind of touching back for a second, nowadays we recognize, especially when we're in a healing role, that there is a correlation between these kind of unconscious thoughts and perceptions who were kind of designed to be, and then how we show up on the mental level, how that moves particular emotion, it moves energy in the field, and then that shows up on the physical level as feeling and physiology. And there's a relationship between all those things, and beginning to understand that relationship gives us ways to find clues as to what's going, you know, it's, if you know who me at all, like one of my favorite things is like British mysteries or just solving mysteries. I just love to find the puzzle pieces and the patterns and put them together. So of course I was drawn to a system that was really about like putting together the puzzle pieces and figuring out how they all fit together. So in today's masterclass, we're going to talk about the 5 elements. We're going to talk about the different ways that they relate to each other. And then we're going to look at like what that means in action, because one of the things I really want you to walk away with from this particular experience is actionable steps that you can take with your clients. So before I jump into all that, just want to remind you that you did get an email. Hopefully you got an email that had a PDF attached to it earlier this week. That is the guidebook that goes along with this class. We're not quite into it yet. We will be by the next masterclass, but I wanted you to go ahead and have it. You can start to look through it and start to use it and start to see some of those correlations. It's already there. It's all laid out for you so that you can have it in your hand as a quick reference guide when you're working with the Genius, which we are going to go deeper. There are quick protocols for balancing each element in that PDF. And again, we'll go more into the PDF really starting in the next masterclass. We're still kind of laying the foundation here, but so let's talk a little bit about 5-element theory. There's 2 different theories in Chinese tradition, or in this healing modality, of the 5-element theory, and then sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the 7-element theory. And really they fit together. They're not one or the other. They're just like a bigger picture. The 7-element is a bigger picture of the 5-element. And then there is an even bigger picture to that I will eventually do a course on, or I have been working on writing a course for, which involves the 8 extraordinary meridians, which then guide the 7 elements, which then guide the 5 elements. So there's kind of layers upon, similar to the layers of energetic information in our auric field, or the different chakras and how they fit together. It's the same in 5-element theory. So you'll hear me talk about it as 5 elements, but there's, again, understand that that's a piece of a bigger puzzle. But getting a hang of this one piece is kind of the foundational moment, right? So this masterclass is about the foundation of it. And then if you were to choose to go on into the trainings, which, you know, we'll talk about later, but if you were to choose to go on into any of those trainings, we go much deeper into these things. But, you know, ultimately just getting this can be life-changing. So So on this particular screen, we're looking at the kind of the foundational information around the elements. And so in Chinese theory, it starts with the all oneness of the universe, the spiritual nature, the Tao, as it's called in Taoism. Again, you guys have heard me say that we refer to that energy depending on the field in many different ways. So if we're looking at it from religion, it might have God names attached to it. From spirituality, it might be source or universal love. And then from a scientific perspective, they're going to call it 0 point energy or dark matter, right? But ultimately what we're saying is that there's this kind of one energy that is the fabric of all things. And that's what the ancient Chinese tradition observes. So you've got this universal source energy. There's no form, it's just light. And then there is this moment, we won't go into all the theory of how it happens, but basically there is a split between the oneness and something becomes two. And so we have duality. And in that duality, what we really begin to see is this relationship between polarity, between, and really, if you're looking at it from a quantum physics perspective, you're looking at like I just lost my thought process. So you're looking at kind of black hole, you're looking at the singular point, you're looking at like wormholes, right? There's all this really cool, you can go down a whole scientific exploration of how we have polarity, but ultimately, the idea here is that we come from this oneness, and then we begin to the goal of becoming human is about having an experience so that we can observe ourselves, so that we can have this interaction, right? So that starts with, in Chinese medicine, that starts with the two poles, which become the governing vessel and the central vessel when we look at it from a meridian perspective. And if you've ever seen the yin yang, right, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about that within both sides, there's always a piece of the other. So on one side, if you're looking at the yang side, there's the dot of white, that is the yin inside the yang. And then vice versa, if you're looking at the yin side, the white side, there is the black dot, and that is the yang inside the yin. So there's, if you look at it as a 3D model, you're looking through the middle from one side to the other in that dot, right? So there's this connection, and it's similar from a quantum physics to the idea of the two ends of the wormhole, right? Like, we won't go into quantum physics, and I don't know enough really about quantum physics to even be bringing it into this conversation. I know just enough to be dangerous, so I just want to name that too. I will pop up some resources though, if you are curious about that. There are some amazing talks about the relationship between these things that I can put up on in our community, in case anybody wants to see it. So from that duality, then we begin to have this human experience. So we kind of come from the governing vessel and the conception vessel are part of the 8 extraordinary meridians that I was talking about. And so from those structures, we begin, which are kind of that supramental level, right? Like, and that spiritual level, we begin to have this spiritual existence in physical form. And that is when we begin to become the 5 elements. So here we'll see that the 5 elements show up as, on this particular screen, you see all 5 elements down here, and then you see this extra thing right here. That's because in 5 element theory, fire has 4 components. So these two and these two together make fire. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And then you have earth and metal and water and wood. And they are made up by these 12 meridians. But the reason that triple heater and pericardium are up here is because they are kind of governing, they animate the physical body. They have a governing role, where these, as we dive into it, which we're going to dive into in just a second, these have more of a vital energy and a physical role. All of that's going to become more clear in just a minute. But I wanted you to kind of see it from the perspective of how it gets from all one energy to 5 element cycle here. So the 5 elements in general, if you have not worked with 5 elements or you're not quite sure what they are the elemental breakdown of that movement of the energy in nature and in the cosmos, and how that is reflected all the way down to the physical body. So in Chinese tradition, in like acupuncture and Chinese medicine, they look at these meridians, which are movements of energy in the physical body. They call that qi in Chinese medicine, but in other traditions, it's prana, it's life force, it's vital energy, right? But what it means is that it's how energy moves in predictable ways and in certain patterns in the physical body and around in the energetic field, right? So there's a direct correlation in Chinese medicine between an organ and it's the movement of energy that represents the organ. And so we're going to look at that in just a minute. We're going to look at that a little bit deeper, but the way that you can understand that is that the movement of energy in our vital body represents kind of the emotional body. The vital body is what we call it in those 5 bodies of consciousness that I talked about in the first session. So when we're looking at meridians, we're looking at this movement of qi, this emotion, energy in motion. And if you look at the motion of that energy, it has associated patterns. And that's what this whole class is about, is that those, like, it's not just that we're looking at the liver meridian, it's understanding that the liver meridian has a bigger pattern to it, a bigger archetype, and that's the wood energy. And so it's going to have certain thought patterns, it's going to have certain emotional patterns, it's going to have certain feelings, and it's definitely going to have its own physiology and how it looks. So when we're working with that energy, as we get deeper into the master class, it's understanding how Western medicine might perceive what the liver does and doesn't do, and then we'll overlay that with what Chinese medicine says the liver is, because it would include the spiritual, the mental, the spiritual, the supramental, the mental, the emotional, and the physical, all at one time. We want to look at all of that at one time. Remember from that first master class, I talk about the collapse event of all of it at once. So to have the thought is to have the emotion, the feeling, and the physiology to experience all of that at one time. I know that was kind of a lot to take in, but I'm going to keep saying that. So eventually it's going to land. So you might already know it too, but I'll just keep reiterating it, right? So this is kind of how we see the whole picture. Like, we're zoomed out in this picture, but then we're going to kind of go in now and look more at the different cycles of energy, how that energy moves in the 5 elements. So I might have missed one. No. Okay. I'm going to say this here because I think it's important, and then we'll drop out. So most 5 element models will show this, that you have fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. So here in the fire, you can see we have that small intestine and the heart, the triple heater and the pericardium. They're kind of considered 2 different aspects of the fire element. So you have this ministerial, which is that triple heater in the pericardium, and then you have the physical, which is the small intestine and the heart. And then it shows that the next element in this particular wheel, if we're starting from the top, would be earth, which is made up of stomach and spleen. And then that goes to metal, which is made up of lung and large intestine, which goes to water, which is made up of kidney and bladder. And then to wood, which is made up of liver and gallbladder. And so this model is the most people work from this model. If we work backwards from the Tao and we include more of the I Ching and some of those other pieces of the puzzle, we sometimes see earth in the middle. Because when we really break it down and look at it, earth is actually the Melu that holds it all together. So you find earth in some models as the center of everything. And then you would see the other 4 energies as basically north, south, east, and west, right? You would see these. So sometimes you see a model where earth is in the middle. Earth is also our ability to make transitions. So we also associate earth with the equinoxes as we move from one season to the next. So you see, like, if you could really see it, what from that holistic perspective, Earth is everywhere. It's in the middle and it's in between all of the other elements. But when we associate the elements to a season, which they all are, remember, we're looking at it from the model of nature. So wood is spring, fire is summer, earth is happens in late summer. It's like harvest, and then metal is fall, and then water is winter, right? And so it has its own season, this kind of between the bloomingness of summer and this time to like collect the harvest is earth, this time for it to, and then it goes into the fall where we decay and create compost of the season. So I'm going to talk more about that stuff as well, but I just kind of want to lay it here that there's this seasonal aspect to the, and what it basically says is that everything moves in a season, and that's a holograph. So your day follows this same season, right? You wake up, you kind of waking up inside this wood energy. The fire is the manifestation of your day. The earth is the dinner time as you wind things down. The metal is as you release the day, and then the water is into the nighttime when you sleep. And so you see it, you can see it in the season of a day. You can see it in the lunar season of a month. It can be correlated to the 5 elements. And then you can see it obviously in a calendar year with the seasons. And then if we even get bigger than that, you can see it seasonally throughout our lives. So our wood time is in our early childhood, and then we have this kind of midlife fiery time. And then we kind of, the retirement age, we kind of slow down and we reap the harvest of our life. And then in the middle is as we're aging and we're releasing and we're preparing to go back to the earth. We go back to the earth and water. We start in that perspective, we start as the primordial soup and we come from that and then we return to that, right? And so what I want you to really get out of that is that there's this cyclical nature of who we are, and our body is tuned into that cycle. We have what's called the meridian clock, which shows when each one of these meridians would be getting recharged throughout the day, because the meridian clock is tuned into these cycles. So really that's what circadian rhythm is. If we were to look at it from that perspective, it's our ability to stay in tune with these cycles of our day, these ups and downs and the different meridians. Actually, if you were to see the way that meridians move, if we could look at it in movement, the meridians make constant waveform. Now that would not surprise any of us in the sense of like the whole universe is made of waveform, right? But like, and we know that because we're energy practitioners, but it's really cool to see how as it moves through the wheel of the clock, it moves, it ascends and it descends throughout the day, making these waveforms. And really that is then translated to who we are, who we show up on that spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical level, right? So when we look at the flow of this, then here, when we see the arrows moving in this direction, this is what we would call the flow cycle, the natural cycle of life. One thing feeds, or the nurturing cycle is another way you might hear it. So you can see that water feeds wood, and that wood would feed fire, and that fire feeds earth, earth feeds metal, and metal feeds water, or it nurtures it, right? And so this is, you need water for the seed to sprout and grow. That's wood. The tree grows and it blooms and it blossoms, and that's fire. It fruits and we collect it, that's earth, and then it drops its leaves and its whatever fruit is left, it drops that and it decays, and we learn and we evolve through reflection and decomposition, that's metal, and then we return to water, right? So that's the flow cycle, the natural cycle of things. But also within Chinese medicine, there is something called the control cycle. And this is the energy. So if you think about something going around in a circle, it needs something to create tension to keep it in checks and balances, right? So it's not just about it always flowing around and around, although we want really to be in homeostasis. on a physical level where everything's, all in resonance, we want that flow cycle moving really smoothly. But there's also these kind of checks and balances built in, and we call that the control cycle. And what we see then is we see this across the chart energy that creates this tension that holds it all together. So we can see that wood then would control earth, and that earth controls water, water controls fire, fire controls metal, and metal controls wood. And so, and you can think that the easy way to remember that is that, of course, water controls fire. That's always the easy one for us to like, right. Water would put out fire. So too much water would put out the fire, not enough water, and we don't have the steam necessary to create or do something, right? It takes that. So you can see that relationship in the control. It's a fine balance between, like, if we talk about earth and water, then earth is kind of the boundary to water. If you think about river banks or the banks that contain something, too much earth with water gets muddy or flooding, right? Like not enough earth is like too much water is flooding, but too much earth then doesn't let the water move, right? We want the water to move easily. So we don't want to keep it compacted or make it hard for the water to move. So that's some ways that you can kind of begin to think about these cycles. And as we move through the class, we'll talk more about what that looks like when you're working with a client. But right now, I just kind of want you to have this good, solid sense of like, these are the different cycles that we're working with when we're working with the 5 elements. And beginning to think, so already the 5 elements asks us to kind of think about what we're hearing the client is saying or what we're seeing in the genius, and like, oh, I'm hearing that might be a relationship between fire and water, or that might be a relationship between earth and metal, right? Like, and we're going to learn how to find those relationships, not to worry, but just kind of beginning the process of thinking it, right? We're thinking about what am I seeing, and what tools then do I have? In the Genius, you might have other libraries. We're going to talk about how to pull in all sorts of information as we go through. Like, for example, if you know you're having an earth imbalance, and I'll just, a little spoiler alert, one of the major indicators that somebody has an imbalance in earth is worry. They're worrying too much. They're in their mind, they worry, they're ruminating, and they're churning. And so when we churn something in the brain, we churn it in the stomach. And so you see you've got the stomach and spleen relationship to earth. And so they might have digestive issues. Right now, digestive issues are going to be bigger than just earth. You're going to look at wood. You're going to look at the relationships between things. But already you might be hearing, oh, they might have come in and told you they have a digestive issue. And you might then be prompted to say, like, is there something that you're trying to process emotionally or mentally that's hard for you right now, that's keeping you up at night, or you're really having to think on it pretty hard? It's not always it doesn't have to be necessarily worry is bad. It can also be somebody trying to work something out, we'll talk about that as we go, but we tend to like start with what doesn't feel right, what's out of balance. So that's the flow cycle and the control cycle. And so I really want to just kind of show you this, because this is the kind of the essence. From now on, we're really going to kind of dig into the different elements, what they mean and how they show up. But I really want you to have this kind of understanding of the relationship between the different aspects of this chart, or of these elements, right? So I can't quite see my whole screen and what I really wanted you to see here, other than this is the whole picture, right? So now we see the control cycle, or the flow cycle, and the control cycle together. And so we can see now that to have something like homeostasis in the body could be really challenging. If you're trying to keep the energy moving perfectly in all of these places and in all of these ways, that can feel really overwhelming, right? And really, to be human, it would be really hard to have nothing but harmony and balance going on inside all of these things. So we tend to see things that might show up in more of an acute situation, like I'm worried about a specific situation right now, and my earth is out of balance because of that. And it's a place where we can look to see where we have these kind of more chronic situations happening where maybe I have this chronic fear. We're going to talk about the associations to emotions in just a minute, but water is one of its main associations is to fear. So if I have this like early childhood trauma that's left my body stuck in a state of fight or flight or freeze, so I have this chronic fear going on in the background, it's going to create a chronic situation in the chart. We tend to see chronic situations more in the control cycle, and we tend to see acute situations more in the flow cycle. And we'll talk more about that as we go too, but I'm just kind of naming that here, right? So we will see all of it together, because if you have something chronic, you also have something acute, right? Like, and so, and we'll talk about how to find those things and things like that as we go. But I want you to kind of see, like, there could be this chronic problem going on, and what you're seeing in the genius, when you're using the genius, is something more acute. But it's also thinking like, is this acute problem related to a bigger pattern that's been going on for longer? And being willing to investigate the both, and that there might be, I might be stuck in a state of worry, but it comes from this deep irregulated or dysregulated fear that's got this whole system out of balance, and the earth is where it's showing up, right? So it's beginning to think about the correlations between the two. When we look at 5-element work, when we're working with the genius, it's not as easy as just giving you all a protocol. And when I first wrote the NeuroCohesion class, and thank you to all of you that are here and still supporting me, and all of you that went through that class and supported me as I wrote it, because it was so hard for all of us to move from this kind of being given protocol-driven information to use the genius, to this kind of like abstract, I have to think it through and find it, and not, I can't just say do this thing, because you have to know like what's going on in relation. It's a relationship issue, right? So it's like, and so it's more challenging to teach than just saying at the end of this, you're going to have a protocol that you can use no matter what. And at the same time, I have now learned how to give the protocols that you need to get started, and then also how we can go deeper into looking for those patterns. So this is the 5 elements. This is kind of the whole picture. So let's talk a little bit. We're going to use, through this masterclass, we're going to really use it at an emotional level, right? So, and that's how we're going to use it as we start next week. Or the next session, we'll do some much more demoing. Like, we'll get really into like actually using it as we work through each of the elements. But we're going to look at it mostly from the emotional perspective. In the actual courses, we go into like the mental level and the spiritual level and all this connection. But here, it's really, if you can get to the place where you're understanding what's going on the emotional level, then you know that there's an associated mental, there's an associated physical, and those things will start to harmonize as you harmonize the emotion, as we know, right? So it's like, it's actually a more important movement than necessarily the physical level. So when we look at the 5 elements from an emotional perspective, there are many emotions that are associated with each element. I want to name that. But as we move through, we're going to talk about the ones that it's kind of the key element or the key emotion that lets you know what element you're dealing with. So in this case, fire would be anxiety. Earth would be worry. Metal would be grief. Water would be fear. And wood is anger. And so you can take a second to just kind of look through, like you can see where people who are really afraid, they mask that with anger, and that can lead to anxiety, and then they worry, and then they go to this. So grief gets kind of, there's 2 aspects to grief. One is the grief of loss, the true grief that comes from loss, from separation, from whatever it is that creates that kind of grief in the heart. But we also like to look at it as grievances. What's bothering me? What am I having a hard time letting go of, right? So I'm holding on to it. When we look at and we'll look deeper, but when we look at metal energy, it's the lung and the large intestine. It's the large intestine is the ability to let go so that the lung can take in something new, to be inspired. So in this wheel, you can see when you're worrying on something, when you're ruminating on something, you're not letting it go, and it's grieving you. It creates a grievance, right? It's bothersome. It bothers you. And you might be then a victim. So we see a lot of victimhood happen here, where we get stuck in victim mindset, where we, like, at this point, we've got this deep fear that we don't even know about that's driving this protective part that's angry, that's leading to this anxiety, that's keeping everything kind of ramped up. And so I'm worried about it. And so, because, you know, the anxiety doesn't want you to put it down until you solve it. So I'm going to ruminate it. And then I've got this, like, and now I'm stuck in this pattern, right? And so you can see that easily. You can see that kind of flow cycle. And then again, when we look at it from the control cycle, we can see that you can see it come across, right? So obvious, like fear and anxiety, we see that a lot, right? This, and then anxiety and grief, this looks like anxiety and depression, right? We see this, there's a balance. And when we look at it from a neurotransmitter perspective, like that's a more advanced in NeuroCohesion 2, when we really get into neurotransmitters and enzymes and all that stuff, it's more about, like, if you're looking at this anxiety and grief, you're looking at, like, anxiety and depression, then from a neurotransmitter perspective, you can imagine it's this balance between these neurotransmitters that activate and these neurotransmitters that deactivate, right, or suppress. And so so you can see that there's a fine balance in the middle, right? This fine balance in the middle that you can see in the control cycle. But when we harmonize all of those things, I might have missed, or I might not have. So when we harmonize those things, then we can see the higher expression. So just like in the I Ching, just like human design, which we'll talk about closer to the end, we see where there's a lower expression, or a shadow expression, if you want to use that word, unbalanced expression, however it feels right to you to use those words. It's not wrong. It's just the indicator that, like, if you guys have read David Hawkins' book about power versus force, there's this, like, scale of where we are with things. And to be human is to be moving up and down that scale all the time, right? So it's just an indicator of, like, I'm in anxiety, but on the other end of anxiety is joy. And so we can see where, like, what's stressing me out, or where am I in my joy? We can see that. And so that's kind of the two opposite ends of the fire. And then the earth is, I'm in my worry, I'm in my rumination, or I'm in compassion. I have this bigger picture. I'm able to hold compassion for the part and not necessarily be wrapped up in the worry of it. At the middle, we're looking at, you know, the grief, what's bothering me, what's grieving me, versus inspiration is the other side of grief. Water is hope. So it's fear and hope. And then wood is anger and assertiveness. The other edge, the anger, the wood energy has a lot to do with the neurology of motivation and our ability to move forward. And so anger is a way that we know that we're not quite in alignment with what we're here to do or be in the world, with our life plan. So when we look at wood, and we'll get there, it's like our ability to follow our life plan. And when things are not following the plan, we get angry, right? Like, but when we're in a higher expression of that, I actually like to use the word courage more here than anything else, because the ability to be, it's the courage that it takes to live your life plan versus just the anger and assertiveness, right? So it's like, I mean, to be assertive can also be to be self-assured in a way. Like, it's like, I know what I'm here to do. I know that I'm ready to do it, and I'm going to expand and show up from that perspective. And so, and then again, I don't know why I don't have the one that's in the flow cycle, but you can begin to see at the higher expression how these things harmonize, right? They're the energy that can help harmonize the lower energy. So when we're in, let's say, a very stressed state, it's like, you know, when we do, if you guys have ever experienced somatic work, a lot of somatic work is like finding the feeling of an emotion in the body. Let's say it's anxiety, and then finding the emotion of joy and swinging back and forth between those things, introducing them to each other, right? And it's similar what we're doing energetically, is we're saying, I've got this anxiety, and it's got this waveform. That was really bad. I don't even know how to do my fingers in waveforms that look right. But, and then I'm gonna bring joy to it. And from an energetic perspective, I mean, y'all know this, so I don't really need to say it, but like, what we're doing is the higher vibration waveform meets and entrains the lower vibration, right? So it takes it in. It isn't getting rid of it. It isn't, like it's helping that other waveform entrain so that it can amplify in its highest expression. And when we look at things through the perspective of, like, let's say the gene keys from a human design perspective or from a gene key perspective, it's Richard Rudd has the gene keys laid out like a shadow, a gift, and what he calls the city state, SIDDHI, which is the highest expression. And the gift helps you go through the shadow so that you can have the higher expression. It's not to avoid the shadow. It's to use the shadow to learn and grow. It's the grievance that helps us grow. And then we have this higher expression that is the result of that relationship, right? And that's similar to what we're doing here, is like we're looking for the higher vibration, and we're using this energy technique to help us harmonize this lower, what's here that we need to learn so that we can be in our joy. And that's why when we work from a 5-element perspective, we're working alchemically. It's not just about somebody coming into you and saying, I'm stressed, I'm burnout, I have a lot of anxiety, and just harmonizing anxiety. Although, again, just to harmonize their anxiety is restorative. And a lot of times we need to have restorative work before we can do alchemical work. But to find why someone has anxiety is alchemical. And so that's what the 5 elements allows you to do, is it says, okay, let's do a little bit of balancing and harmonizing around the anxiety, just getting you back to a place of homeostasis, or a quiet place, a calm place that you can then go look at the deeper relationship between the 5 elements, which might show you where you have anxiety, right? So in this case, it might be coming from a deep fear, and that fear is controlling your joy, right? Like it's creating anxiety instead of allowing you to live your passion, so from a water perspective, when we look at water, I call it the creator energy. It's like, everything comes from source. Am I sourced first? Am I in alignment with that part of me that's bigger than something else, so that I can look at what's out of balance, so that I can align with my life path and then live from that place, right? So hold on. I missed somewhere there was another thing I wanted to show you, but it's gone now. So when we work, I'm going to be aware of time, I'm starting to be aware of time. So when we work with the flow cycle, it's the beginning. What I want you to play with between now and the next time we meet is beginning to think, what emotion am I seeing? If you're working remotely and you're not actually having a conversation with your client, then when you're working remotely, what emotions am I seeing? What emotions might be, what element might that be associated with? Again, you have the guidebook that goes with this class, so you can start to kind of look at it and say, what pattern am I seeing over here for this person? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But the first thing is to identify what negative emotions you want to work with. So when your client first tells you what's going on, do you hear fear? Do you hear anxiety? Do you hear grief? Do you hear worry? Do you hear anger, right? Like, or do you see it if you're just looking, if you're not actually working directly with them? And then naming, okay, this person is definitely in a state of worry. And so that is earth energy. So the thing I know I'm going to work with today is earth energy. And just so you know, in that guidebook, there's a little, on the earth page, there's a little quick protocol to balance earth. That is adaptable. It is just a kind of a quick reference for you to have a little something to start. And you will be getting the 5-element emotion master branches. It's just, there's a lot of you, and we have to type you in one at a time. So those are going to start going out next week, and hopefully you'll have them before we meet the next time. But so you'll have this library that you can use to balance earth. And then there's also a couple other things that you could pull in and do with it. Obviously in the training, there's a whole nother set of libraries. There's a whole different thing that goes on that we dive deeper into, but look, just because it has more doesn't make it more effective, right? Like sometimes the best way to get where we're trying to go is to keep it simple. And that's when I've been using these 5-element balancings for years, you know, and they're very effective, just what you're getting from this masterclass. So don't think you're missing out on something in the sense of, for those of you that know there are NeuroCohesion libraries, that's amazing. And also just this simple library can do a lot for somebody. So then beginning to think about what element is it? And then where does it fall in the cycle? So this is the beginning of understanding like thinking through the relationship. So let's say they are worried, you're finding worry, and now I know that worry is earth, and earth lives between fire and metal in the 5 element cycle. And then what do I know? It's like looking back at that picture and saying, okay, so fire actually nurtures or gives energy to earth, and earth gives energy to metal. So maybe looking for like, as you look at your guidebook, are the relationships between what they're worrying about and either stress on the fire end, or depression or grievances or victim mindset on the metal side. And then you're knowing like, okay, I'm going to work. I'm also going to start to think about the relationship between elements, right? And so not necessarily in a way that you need to dive in deep right now, but just starting to like take the time to think it through for a minute. Like, just think it through. What do I know about earth? What do I know about why am I here? Why are they worried? What other element could be causing that worry, right? So it's like starting to just think like that. And then, like I said, you're looking for the relationship. So here it says often there's more than one emotion or element, right? So we often see fear and anger working together, right? Fight or flight, right? Like we see that relationship. So it's like I'm working with water and wood when I'm doing that, because I want to work with the anger. The anger is often one, it is a fear response, but it also tends to be a protector either of something in metal, like the fear, you know, or water, which is fear, or in metal, we often see people that are afraid of being rejected or abandoned. Like that energy is often protected with anger, right? So you might be thinking about like, what could anger be protecting? What other emotion is here, right? It's like, and starting to think about those two things. And then of course, I mean, I just had like, y'all are an amazing community. All I really need to say is load the genius, right? So it's like, let's say at that point, let's say we're working with worry. We'll go back to earth, and you've loaded the things from the earth element, and you've loaded the things I've told you to load, but you also know they're having a lot of digestive issues, and you happen to have libraries that are for digestion or pH, or, you know, I mean, there's an amazing plug here for bioterrain, right? Like, so what other things do you already have that you can pull into that balance and harmonize? Because you know they're having a physical representation of this churning, and it's in their digestion, right? Or let's say they're having some stress going on in fire, and you happen to have some libraries for balancing maybe some reactive stress states, or like anxiety in general. I know there's some amazing panels for anxiety. One of the other things that we see a lot when fire's out of balance is ADD. You might have some different panels that you already, or libraries that you already have, that you can start to incorporate into. One of the things that I really wanted when I wrote NeuroCohesion in the first place was a place for people to integrate everything. Like it's an integration point. It isn't a way. It's a place for you to begin to pull together a lot of different things that you already know or you're creating. So, you know, I know Ariel has a ton of amazing libraries on her end. I know Insight Health Apps has a ton of amazing libraries on their end. There's so many ways that you can pull in different information. And the more you understand how it all lines up and talks to each other, the more information you can pull in. Like, for example, on your protocols, I've given you the correlation to the chakras. So if you know you're working with earth energy, then from our perspective, from my perspective, and there's definitely different schools of thought, so I want to name that too, but I tend to find that earth energy correlates most to the throat chakra. And so you might have someone who you're working with earth energy and it's showing as a throat chakra imbalance, you're going to pull the throat chakra in. And if you are someone who knows more about what's going on in the throat chakra, you can pull all that if you've got some great panels for that. Or if you work with the gene keys and you want to look at what gates are in the throat and what might be active for that person, you can then look at those things and pull them in. Thyroid issues might be part of an earth imbalance. Blood sugar issues might also be because of the spleen relationship. Immune stuff because of the spleen relationship, right? So you've got, as you begin to understand what you're seeing, you can then begin to pull in other information. And I think that's a really important thing. But also understanding that a very simple and basic protocol, maybe it's only 15 waveforms, can be just as impactful as something that you've packed full of 200, right? Like there is a sweet spot there, right? Y'all, that because people are trying to receive this energy and take it in and do something with it. So sometimes just a few things that are harmonizing everything is better than trying to fix a lot of things. So I just want you to keep that in mind. Sometimes it needs a little more, and sometimes it needs a little less, and just feeling into that in this space. So, okay, so then working with the control cycle, remember the control cycle is the one that goes across. The one that goes across, then you're going to, same concept though, like, what is the first negative emotion I found? Maybe it's anger. And now I'm looking across from anger, and that is worry, right? And so it's like, is there something showing for them that's in that relationship? Or is there something going on between fear and anxiety with water and fire, right? And so, and when you have that, you may need to be loading some of the highs and lows from both elements, right? Like I'm going to work with both the highs and lows of my water, which is the fear, and the highs and lows of my fire, which is the anxiety. That's obviously a direct correlation to that fear, right? So it's not different. The control cycle isn't different. You're just understanding that it has a different dynamic in the relationship. Okay, so I'm gonna stop my share. Look, y'all, I mean, I packed that in there, and I am a little bit sorry for how fast I think I threw that at you. And I know we talked about diving more into like working physically this week. But in between, I was like, you know what? I actually think we need to lay this foundation pretty solidly so that you have some time to really understand the relationship, so that the next few weeks, when we're really just demoing and we're looking at the different elements and what they mean, it has a place to land, right? So it's like, I think that's a really useful. If we don't understand what the 5 elements are doing or what their relationship is, then the whole purpose of this masterclass is kind of like it loses its purpose, right? So, okay. I do want to say to that as we get to the end, and then I'm going to see if anybody has any questions, but before, in case somebody has to pop off, next week I'm on a board, and the board had to reschedule a thing, and I can't get out of it. So next week we will not have class. And we will meet the next Friday, right? And so, and there'll be one more time that I have to do that because of a speaking engagement that I have to go do, which is great and awesome. So next week we will not be meeting, but I would love for y'all to be thinking and using those PDFs, right? Like starting to think about it even before you get the libraries. How can you start to look through what you already have on the Genius? There's meridians in there, there's chakras in there, there's all sorts of different ways for you to begin to pull that information together just from what you've already heard today, right? And that PDF that you have. And I would love for you to be doing that and just playing around so that when we start demoing, you can bring something to that, right? You can bring some thoughts and some experiences to that moment. And so with that, I want to remind you that all of the recordings will be posted in the IHA Mighty Network space, so you can find the recordings. You can go back and listen. I do tend to talk fast and pack a lot in, so watch it again if you need to. And I'm always available for emails if you have questions, or if you're working with things and you have questions, please reach out. And with that, I just want to see if there's any questions. If anybody, I haven't looked at the chat, but does anybody have any questions about all of that we packed in today that they'd like to get answered? Or does it feel like it landed okay? Thank you, Lisa. Thank y'all for the nodding. I appreciate that. Yes. All right, now I can see your faces. So let's see. I'm going to check the chat real quick. Linda asked, what about the emotional panel? Yeah, so like what, so absolutely, right? This is great. This is great. I want you to think about like, okay, I'm going to open their emotional, maybe that's your door in, right? I open the emotional panel and the top emotion is grief, or the top emotion is anxiety, right? Like, and you're like, oh, okay, well, I know that might be getting their fire element out of balance, right? And now I know these things about fire. Or you can start to look at the relationship between what's in red and what's in blue in the emotional, right? Like it might be showing you where there's a relationship between two different elements, where one might be kind of like the anger is showing at the top. It's hot, it's fast, and then, but down at the bottom, there's grief, right? Like, and you're like, oh, right. Like this is a relationship between metal and wood, right? That's a great place to look. So yes. And anywhere else where you're starting to think those things, right? Like think about what different panels you could be looking at. You've got some great ones in there. You know what the Bach flower essences are, right? Like most of you have a guide to those. That's also a great place to look to see what emotions might be. Or if that's what's showing that they need, then why would they need that particular Bach flower essence? Because this emotion is maybe creating some imbalances, and that's the Bach flower that they need to harmonize it. And that might tell you something. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think the guide even tells you what element or what meridian is associated with the Bach flower. And if not, there is a library that is the floral acupuncture that does, right? So it's like it kind of gives you a point, like a bladder point, and an essence, and you know you're working with water energy when you use that bladder point, right? So not for it to get too crazy complicated yet, because we're just going to build. That's what we're going to do. We're going to just keep building, but I would love for you to have a good sense of the flow and the control cycle as we move into not next week, but the week after, and we'll really dive in. We'll start looking at the elements, and we'll do that through demos. We'll do it like we'll look directly at them. We'll look at all 5 elements, but we'll do it through demoing. So start to think about, maybe, do you want to be a volunteer? Please email me in advance if you want to be somebody who's a volunteer for some of those demos, so that I can have things prepared on my end. But I think that's it. I mean, y'all, look, it's 1:59. I am really proud of myself because I tend to go a little bit over, right? Like I timed that, and we are here. So, all right. If there are no more, I don't see any more questions from y'all that I need to get to. But again, if I missed you for some reason, definitely email me, and be looking for the libraries. Again, there's a lot of people registered, so it'll just take us time to get them out, because y'all know if you do any group work, it's one email at a time. We have to type it in. So, and if anybody wants to hound Ryan about that with me, we can do that, because I would love for him to figure out a way that we could send it to a whole page of people at one time. So, all right. Thank you for being here, for showing up again for this second class. And we will make sure it's posted in the Mighty Network space, but we will see you not next week, but the week after. And happy geniusing in the world. And we'll see you soon. Thanks, y'all.